Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you. I know I might sound redundant when I say congratulations, but it really is a great achievement. 10 years in the making, it's amazing, especially when you consider that there are no paid staff here. This all comes from volunteer work from people who hold their own jobs, doing their own things to sustain their own lives and well-being. And in their additional time, they dedicate their energies to making it all of this possible. And that is a testimony to group work, to coming together for something. So it's really thrilling for me to be here and to see you guys do such wonderful things. And today, if that's okay with you guys, our topic is Together but Different. Differences and diversity from a spiritual perspective, which I feel is a important, contemporary, and pressing topic. We live in difficult times. We live in very confusing, delicate, and polarized times. And that is not just in our society here in this great country of ours. But throughout the world, you can see people struggling to understand others who are perhaps different than they are. And oftentimes we see lots of conflicts, exactly because we seem to think that those who are different than us might sometimes be a threat to us. So is it the case? Is it really? And more importantly, is there anything that a spiritual perspective can tell us or help us understand and make sense of this jaded, polarized, sometimes mistrustful, and sometimes aggressive world out there? Isn't it interesting that technology, in a way, has made the world a lot smaller? We have come farther than our fathers and our grandfathers ever thought possible. We're able to have video conferences with people who are across the world in a matter of seconds. We're able to learn about new places, new things, new activities. We're able to undertake new endeavors, new work, all because this incredible amount of thought that went into developing these techniques and gizmos and devices that make it possible for us to connect with people and to see things we've never seen before. But I find it a little curious that even though we've developed all of that and that technology has the power to make us closer to each other, we still struggle with those who are different than us. So, why is that? I think intuitively we appreciate that which is different. We like sometimes going to different places, going out on vacation, meeting different people. But I would venture a guess that if we are to look outside, we'll see that that is not always a constant. If we just take a quick inventory of the world around us, from a political perspective, we find ourselves divided in this country between two different teams that can not only not agree on things, but also make a point in vilifying each other. If technology has enabled us to get together with people virtually from different places, it has also enabled us to attack and insult them without ever seeing them. And so we have become an island unto ourselves, and it has made it very difficult for us to build relationships with people. And in a way, it's even curious that we now live closer physically in big cities with a lot of people that our forefathers never thought possible, living out there in faraway places with not a lot of people. But we do have perhaps less relationships of a meaningful caliber than they did. because we don't spend the time to talk to people. Perhaps our 400 channels on TV have taught us that if we don't like something for 30 seconds, we should change it. And that makes us very self-centered in a way. So our politics is no different. And I don't want to talk politics. I want to talk about politics for a little bit, if you don't mind. Because if politics is not about coming together and compromising on our differences, then I don't know what it is. Relationships are about living together and compromising on our differences. And nowadays it seems that all that we are really vested into is to overpower those who think different than us. And we see compromise as a weakness. And that puts us in a very difficult position to have any kind of meaningful relationship, where that is in politics or that's at home. So what we hope to do is to bring a little bit of a spiritual lens to try to understand what's happening here and whether there are tools that we can think about and use to make our life a little bit more fulfilling and a little bit more meaningful. Does that make sense? So, and I don't talk just, of course, about our great country and this divide that we oftentimes find between Democrats and Republicans and all these different divisive issues that people tend to polarize us around for a specific purpose. But if you look around the world, we had Brexit a little bit ago too, where there was also a very active decision to say no to the outside world. We don't want to be with other people. They just bog us down. Right? In our country, you see the same argument, that those who are from outside this country really just bog us down. France always went down that drain as well. And it also struggles with problems of otherness, with immigrations from Africa and so forth. And everywhere you look, we are making as human beings a difficult connection to understand, which is we are connecting the other to be less than, a nuisance, or a threat to us. That seems to run counter to the very concept of humanity. Because the reason why we have progressed over time is because we have been able to come together as a society and say, we are going to live together in this group of people. We are going to make specific rules so that we can benefit from everybody's participation. The social contract, so to say, as the philosophers would say. And that's why we have laws. And our circle has been growing, but it has been challenging us a little bit as well. So, how do we understand all of this? Can we make sense of this? Is this a pattern of things to come? Should we just brace for impact and continue to have these arguments of whether we are really meant to be together? Should we separate ourselves into race, gender, sexual orientation, sexual preference, ability? These are questions that are very difficult, because if you live outside and you don't have a spiritual perspective, I can't understand how the world can seem to be going to hell in a handbasket. But when we look at our spiritual, when we look with our spiritual goggles on, then our perception changes a little bit, and that's what I hope that we can do, that we can bring a little bit of a spiritual light to all these different divisions and things, and see if we can be more fulfilled by all of them. And to do that, if that's okay with you, I want to talk a little bit about differences, right? And so when we look around in the world and take a physical perspective around things, we see some obvious things. We are different. We are different. We have different ethnicities. We have different races. We have different genders and gender identities, which are really complicated for most of us to understand, right? How we identify with a gender versus the biological gender that we have and the emotional attachments that we have. These are all difficult things gender-wise for us to really comprehend. And these are things that we're struggling to understand because we haven't, as a society, really talked about this that much, if maybe for the last 20 years out of thousands of years of evolution, right? We also have belief. We have a diversity in belief. We believe different things. And I'm talking about spiritual and religious beliefs. We have a different perspective on the world and how the world should run and how the world should be measured. We also, like we talked about, have different sexual orientations. We have straight, gay, transgender, queer, plus, with a lot of denominations in there that we're beginning to understand. And we also have a neurodiversity. We also have a different wiring of our brains and different cognitive ways of registering the world that we're also only beginning to understand and accept, like autism, ADHD, dyslexia. These are all differences of how our brain perceives information that oftentimes you cannot identify quickly, but you can later perceive there to be a difference, right? And of course, we have lots of other different ways of pinpointing differences, right? In fact, our society has taught us, in a way, to value diversity, or let me say, to value being different. We have been told that being different is good, that leaders should be different, that you should do different things. So if that's the case, then why do we struggle when people are different? So what we're really saying is, it is okay to be different as long as we are different, and people accept us. But other people, they gotta fall in line with what we expect them to. So it's a little bit of an interesting perspective here, especially from a physical perspective, right? Now, if we look at a spiritual perspective and think of diversity from a spiritual perspective, something begins to change here. Something begins to change because we begin to realize that the physical perspective is short-term. It's all that we see here and now. It's you looking at me, and I am looking at you, and you realizing that perhaps you want to be as bald and as big as I am. Who doesn't? Right? And I realizing that you may have a lot more hair than I do. And that I might be very jealous about that. Right? But we clearly, what our eyes see tell us a story that we are indeed different, and we look different, and we need to reconcile that. But we just take a snapshot in time. When we look at a spiritual perspective, then we start looking at experiences versus perception of physical components. So what do I mean by that? The great thing about a spiritual perspective is that it helps us zoom out from our daily lives to consider something greater and something bigger. And when that happens, we begin to understand, especially if we know reincarnation and start working through our own understanding of reality, that that which meets the eye is temporary. So the format and the shape that you are, or I should say, the format and shape who you are, it's nothing but a snapshot in time. What you look like today is not what you look like 100 years ago when you were incarnated in a different life, or 5,000 years ago. So necessarily, we must make way for the concept that we are constantly changing as spirits. In fact, we can make the case that we are constantly changing as human beings because our bodies are constantly changed. In my case, my body changed over time. But in a non-joking way, what I mean by that is, if you think about it, our cells are constantly growing and multiplying. So the body that you started with when you were born is not the body that you have here today. Which makes it really interesting because it points to the fact that you are not your physical self. This is an old conundrum in philosophy. I'll give you an example. Imagine that I have a car. and you really like my car. And you come and you ask me to give my car to you, my Ferrari, because I want to have a Ferrari, this example. And I say no. And then what you do then is, every night, without me noticing, you go into my garage and you take a piece of my Ferrari out and put another one in. So you go on the first night and you take the tire out and you put another tire just like it. And then on the second night you come in and you take the door out and you put another door just like it. And imagine for a second that after a month you've taken all the pieces of my Ferrari and replaced it with similar pieces. The same pieces. Now the question is, do I still have my Ferrari? Or do you have my Ferrari? Isn't that interesting? Right? If they were the same pieces and you swap them, did you steal my car? Who's got the original Ferrari? Is there such a thing as original Ferrari? What there is the idea of a car, of a Ferrari, that was mine. And the same thing happens with our bodies, so to speak. Because our cells keep being replaced by our bodies. And so, even in a matter of months, you might have, as I understand it, a completely different physical body than you started with. But yet, you are the same person. But physically, you are not. So, you are not your physical body. You are your conscience. You are your spirit. So it makes sense that if these parts are being constantly changed in our body, cellularly speaking, when our body ceases to be, our conscience does not. Because our conscience remained there while the body pieces were changed. So the body pieces, the cellular makeup, is not who we are. But when we look at it from that perspective and transplant it to a larger spiritual perspective, we start to understand that the physical body is just that car. It's just a tool for us to go places. The experiences that we have are what we really care about. As we experiment through life, that is what we really take from us, or with us, I should say. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And when we look at that, then we start asking ourselves, but hold on a second, Dan. So what is diversity after all, and why do we have it? Wouldn't it be a lot easier if everybody were the same? It might be easier. But where would the learning take place? Now honestly, think about this for a second, right? If everybody were the same, and looked the same, and had the same tastes, then what would you learn in your daily life? I mean, if everybody's exactly the same, then there would be no progress. We will all look like the same show on Netflix. As a matter of fact, there will probably only be one show in Netflix, because that's the only show we would like. And we only watch that. We will all dress the same. We will talk the same. We will think the same. We'll be indistinguishable from each other. So in that sense, diversity is key to learning. We cannot learn without differences. There can be no learning, I would claim, without the new and without the different. In fact, we need to be exposed to something different to be able to learn. And here's where I want to make a little break to introduce you to an interesting social philosopher and psychologist as well by the name of Lev Vygotsky. And Vygotsky came up with an interesting theory that he called the zone of proximal development, which is a very fancy term that is great for you to use in cocktail parties because it makes you sound really smart. I do that all the time. So let's talk a little bit about that. So imagine for a second, right, that you are just looking at these three circles. Forget what's written here right now. Just imagine three circles. Yeah, you're with me? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, in the middle, imagine that's our comfort zone. It is what is it that we can do today. All the things that we know. Right? Now, imagine that the outside circle, the larger piece over here, are the things that we cannot do, but we want to learn. How do we jump from the inner circle to the outer circle? How do we tackle things that we cannot do today? Well, we literally need to go out of our comfort zones. We need to do different things, right? In fact, he goes further, he says, the big circle outside is what is it that you cannot do today with your current skills, and the inner circle is what you can do with your current skills. The circle in the middle is what you can do if you get some assistance. So if you have a teacher, a mentor, a guide, somebody who's more knowledgeable to you, who shows you the way of doing those skills, you begin to work outside of your comfort zone to reach the outer circle. Otherwise, you won't be able to reach the outer circle. Does that make sense? So, that circle in the middle is essential, because the circle in the middle is the things that you can do with a little bit of assistance, if somebody shows you the way. And if you do those enough, then you're now becoming masterful with that new skill, and then your skill becomes your smaller circle. So your circle of abilities grows, and then you work outside of your circle to learn more things, and then it grows. And then you work outside with help from others, and then it grows, right? So your inner circle keeps growing. And so what does that mean to us? That means two interesting things. One is that all learning comes from discomfort. What I mean by discomfort is you're outside of your comfort zone. So what you know to do. So learning, although it's very joyous, when you master the topic, can be very frustrating as you go along. Right? That's one easy and interesting learning that we learn from Vygotsky in general. The second piece is that all learning activities are social in nature. That you need somebody else to learn. Right? But you can say, no, Dan, I can just read, I can just learn reading a book. I don't need somebody else. That's true, but who wrote that book? Was it you? It couldn't be you by definition because you didn't know it. So how could you write something to you that you did not know it so that you can learn what you didn't know? Right? So we necessarily depend on somebody else to learn. And that's super exciting in a way because it reaffirms to us the importance of the need to hunker down to the idea that we are interdependent. That we need each other to grow. And that this growth takes place to discomfort. Right? So when we use expressions like think outside the box or get out of your comfort zone, they're completely aligned with this theory of learning by Lev Vygotsky. Right? So the questions that we start asking ourselves is, what is it that we are doing today that is different than we did yesterday? Now honestly, if you truly want to learn anything new and grow, can you do that by doing exactly the things you were doing yesterday? By definition, it's impossible. So if you want to advance in your own spiritual evolution, in your career, in your relationship, or what have you, you will need to put yourself outside. And we can go outside our comfort zone to be able to learn something. Right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So what we are faced with here is a conundrum. Because what we really want is the world to stay the same. At least the way we like it. I want my restaurant to always be there. I want my favorite dessert to always be there. I want my favorite clothes never to wrinkle. I want my favorite car never to be stolen by thieves like you that sneak in at night and change my Ferrari parts. I wish. And I want all the people to behave the way I like it, because I am happy. But if you were to do that, then there will be no growth. And if there is no growth, there can be no evolution. If there's no evolution, what are we doing here? Therefore, every change is necessary, a good one. I must say that again because it's a hard conflict, a hard concept to grasp. Every single change that comes into your life is a good one, even the difficult ones. If you look on the short term, on the physical eyes, you might be bothered by it because you were just forced out of your comfort zone. And every dog that's sleeping gets poked does not like it. Right? What were you doing? Right? Right? But if you take the long view and you think of yourself as a spiritual process that happens to be in this form and shape and size today with these skills and abilities, but tomorrow will be different. And literally you will have a physical body that's different, whether you have reincarnated or if your cells have changed. Every change brings you closer to evolution. Which puts us in an unfortunate position, people. It puts us in a position of actually liking our problems from a spiritual perspective. Because every problem becomes an opportunity for growth. And again, one more time, if a problem comes, it's because we can handle it. Because we believe in God. God would not give us more than we can chew. Otherwise, it would be a mean God. And therefore, would not be God, by definition. So every problem that we have, it's just the right size for us to tackle. In fact, we now know through our spiritual perspective that maybe these problems that we face in our lives, the big ones, are things that we ask for. Isn't that crazy? Why would I ask for all that trouble? We think, really? Did I really ask for these parents? Really? Did I really ask to be in this situation? Yes. You did when your spiritual self could understand life better and think from a spiritual perspective when you did not have a physical body yet, when you were ready to come back here, and you said, I want to check all these boxes so that I can grow. And it's quite possible that your friends, your mentors, and guides actually said, no, let's tone you down a little bit. Let's have less problems. We don't know if you want to take that much on that quickly. And so we probably wanted more. But somebody said, no, just take it easy. Just take one at a time. You don't need to do 1,000 years in one incarnation. That'll be fine. But that requires a spiritual perspective to change. Because then we need to think of the eyes of the spirit. We are no longer this physical body. We are a spirit who's temporarily using these clothes. And of course, some of us have designer clothes, and others have not. So some of us have designer bodies, others have not. Right? But so it's important for us to understand that when we shift our perspective to the spiritual, which we are very able to do and are constantly reminded of in Spiritism because we have this constant contact with the spiritual world, we start to lose all the excuses we have not to progress. Because we literally, and I'm not using literally figuratively, everybody does, right? Everybody says literally when they mean figuratively. I'm saying we literally talk to the spiritual realm on an ongoing basis. That is the one constant thing we do in Spiritism. The whole concept of Spiritism came through an interaction between this realm and the spiritual realm. And as we talk to the spiritual realm, we get to learn from those who are no longer trapped by their short-term view about the long perspective. And they remind us of all these things so that we don't lose sight of what's happening over here. Like a diver who dives into the ocean to gather some treasures, but has an assistant up top who's in the boat and can tell us, go a little bit to the left, or the way the current's coming this way, right? So while we're down there, we have a limited view of what's happening. But those who are up top can see the whole horizon, the climate, the weather, and have a radar and can tell us where to go. We just forget that when we're down there sometimes, when we're down here. We're divers into the physical flesh. Right? It's not mine. I wish it were mine though. It's mine. Now, we see that a lot in our books, right? In our Spiritist books, especially the early ones, that tell us that in fact we are, even the old school divers with a big tube of air that goes all the way up, right? And while we're swimming around, we have limited mobility in our physical bodies, right? And we have trouble getting everything done. But we know that we are once more surface, take that apparel, right, the equipment off, and we will feel a lot better. That's going to happen to us. It's us. But while we're down there, we might not be thinking about all these things. We're just thinking about exactly what's ahead of us, right? So, long story short, learning is a fundamental concept for us that requires discomfort and change. So as we ask ourselves, what is it that we're doing different? How is it that we're encompassing all the differences in the world? The question that comes next is, what kind of spiritual perspective and spiritual learning can we gather or focus on while we're going through this sometimes uncomfortable exercise of dealing with that which is different? And that is the act of building empathy, tolerance, and ultimately love. Because when we rub off against our fellow human beings, it hurts. But when we begin to understand those fellow human beings as products of a long spiritual journey, and such as ourselves, then we understand that they're not doing that on purpose. Even if they think that they're doing it on purpose, they're just trying to find their own happiness. Like divers, like bumping into each other, right? Because when we think of the bigger perspective, we are going to understand that just like us, they're doing the same thing. And when that happens, we develop empathy because we begin to understand the other a little better. We hear their stories and we can identify with them and realize that even though they look different than us temporarily, they're in their core the same. Children of God. If we had no shapes, we would be the same. Okay? So it's a fundamental change in the way we think and the way we look at things. That's a very curious one in general for us to digest and understand. Right? And we put these happy faces out there from these wonderful kiddos because I think we know all of this. Because that's how kids behave. Right? Kids can be fearless about exploring and doing different things. They're curious about it. And they are enthralled when they find people who are different than them, to a fault. Because they're going to look at you differently and say, why are you fat? Why do you have no hair? Right? They just want to know. They're not being insulting. The little ones at least. Right? They're just curious because they haven't seen that before and they want to acquire that knowledge. They want to understand. And it's no surprise that we see kids of all kinds, faiths, sexual orientations, and ages, and genders playing together. Not a problem at all. The act of hating on each other is a learned behavior. We teach our kids to differentiate. We teach them that what is different is not good. Now we can go into why that is. Maybe it's our own insecurity. Because when we're talking about the other, we're not talking about ourselves. Right? When we have that short-term perspective, it's easy to blame all the troubles on those who look different than us, especially if they are far away from us. So those who look different and are far away get the stick. because they're not here to defend them, so it's easy to blame. But those who are close to us, those are the ones that matter, right? From a short-term perspective. When we begin to expand our view, our family matters, but our family begins to grow because through the understanding of reincarnation, we know that the family we have today is not the only family we've ever had. You might not have never met in this lifetime, but you could have been my family member in a past one. So should you not also honor and take care of me? Would you not take care and love a family member that you haven't seen for 20 years? When you see them again, won't you feel those bonds? What if you haven't seen them for 500 years? Should that change anything? From a spiritual perspective, it doesn't. So our spiritual family really is everybody, because if you think about it, we don't know how many incarnations we've had. We don't know how many mothers, fathers, cousins, uncles, spouses, children we've had, and who they were. They're all out there. And it begins to destroy this idea of race supremacy. Just to begin with. Because today, you may have this shape, but God knows where you were born last time. Today, maybe you were a male. Yesterday, maybe you were female. And maybe tomorrow you'll be female again. So, shouldn't we treat all the same for our own selfish gains? So we can be spiritually selfish and still turn out okay. So if you're spiritually selfish, it's in your best interest to treat everyone the same. Because you will be different than you are today. And so you want to reap the benefits of an equal and fair society. Does that make sense? It's weird, right? Difficult to digest sometimes because we're so attached to our identity of the body that we have, that considering that we might don a different body or have a different look takes a while to settle. But if we begin to understand God and believe in reincarnation, we cannot reach any other logical conclusion. And this very powerful brain that works differently than everybody else's powerful brain that God has given us. If God has given us a brain and told us not to use, that'd be pretty neat. And again, not a God. Hence, our love for science, philosophy, development, growth, discomfort. Everything that's worthwhile is difficult. Nothing that comes for free is valued by us, because we know that intrinsically there's something different. The Winter Olympics are going on right now, so I always use this example. Imagine that if you were an Olympian, and without competing, I just came and gave you a gold medal. Would that be exciting? Say, here you go. You've done nothing, but have a gold medal. And you might say, cool. Okay. But wouldn't that medal be different if you competed for it and you got it on your own? It's the same medal, right? It's literally the same medal, and not figuratively. Can you tell I have a pet peeve with literally?
Yeah.
Okay.
Me too.
Right? So it's the same medal. But the circumstances in which you arrived at it are different, and therefore that medal has more meaning. It's the same world, but the circumstances in which you go through it and the way you see it give it more meaning when we think through spiritual eyes. So what is it that we are being asked to do, really? We are being asked by God and by our older brother, the Christ, to literally do things differently today than you did yesterday. To go out into the world and be in productive and positive discomfort. His message was one of change. Was asking us to think of the world in a different way. Not just with the physical eyes, but with the spiritual eyes. In fact, if you are to reduce his entire message to something, is that we are going to overcome the physical world. That we will live beyond our physical lives. Because That's exactly what he did. His whole passage here is best remembered by the fact that he rose from the dead. As to show us that when our physical body dies, because as our friend Charles Kemp says, there's a 100% probability that you will die. Sorry to break it to you, I don't know if you knew this. I'm just going to put it out there. Right? And pay taxes. Benjamin Franklin says you're going to die and pay taxes. Only two things certain in life. But what the Christ came to tell us was that we will outlive our physical body. That is his entire message. At least part of it, half of it. And the other half is that we need to help others through the process as we ourselves have been helped. So it's no surprise that he will repeat this in different ways. And when we look at him with different eyes, because we also need to change the way we look at religion and spirituality from all these things that we have been accepting unto ourselves without thinking for maybe millennia. And see Jesus in a different light, not as a religious figure in a book, but as an incredible advanced soul who has an incredibly and inconceivably high EQ and psychological IQ to understand humanity and help us navigate the challenge from day to day. Yes, it is true, all those people in those books have weird names, and they're old. But the messages are really powerful so that we can change our lives. And one of the most beautiful ones in regards to differences is love your enemy. Because what is our enemy after all? There are no enemies when you think about a spiritual perspective. Thinking about enemies is a short-term thing. But when you think in the big perspective of things, there are no enemies. And not only love your enemies, but make peace in the world. And then he says that in the Sermon on the Mount, which we find in Matthew. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those, very poetically spoken, blessed are those who are able to bridge the differences between people and take the animosity away from the process and make peace. Because they will be the children of God. That is to say, they will truly take their role as siblings of the divine. And they will also act like children who are curious and open to change. So our role in this world of ours is to not only make sense of it through navigating our differences, but helping others do the same, as he who is older than us has been trying to tell us for a very long time that we should do, and that our friends, the spirits, also continue to remind us that we need not worry about the short-term challenges of this world, and instead we should look into the long-term perspective of changing ourselves. Because the challenges of the world will soon be done. In the blink of an eye, time goes by. And although we're not 30 yet, soon enough we will be. And then 80. And then we will be gone from this physical body. And all these challenges will go away, but that which we carry with us goes on. And that's a beautiful thing. Because if we work on developing those skills, expanding our circle, as Vygotsky suggested, that we take with us. The things that we acquire, the Ferrari, that doesn't go with us. So what is it that we are doing today that is different than what we did yesterday? Because doing the same thing and expecting different results, as Einstein said, is the definition of madness, spiritual madness. So the Christ is calling us to do something different today than we have done before. Is there room in your heart for that? Is there love for yourself or for those around you, for you to remind yourself of your spiritual essence and try to do things tomorrow that are a little different? It can be as simple as take a different route home. Go to a different restaurant. Talk to somebody different. Read a different book. Spend time differently. thinking of your spiritual selves. Small things, baby steps. Because those things will lead you to grow and appreciate not only the changes that you have gone through, but the different aspects of each other. Seek it out. Seek other people because they are different than you, not because they think the same. If you seek them because they think the same, what good is it in it? Rather than temporary comfort. Go out. Surround yourself with people who think different. Listen to them. You don't have to agree, but you can be together. So I hope that more and more we have a chance of spending so much time with people who are different than us that eventually we'll come to realize that we are all children of God, that we are all the same. And then it will be a beautiful thing because it will be so easy and so comfortable and yet so productive. Because we will continue to learn and we're going to like it. It's going to be wonderful. So as we go out into the world, don't fall into the trap of picking sides. Don't fall into the trap of hating on other people. Be okay with people thinking different, because it's the only thing that has ever moved us forward. We're not asking people to agree with us. We're just asking for civil discourse, a little understanding, and a common perception that we're all here because we're trying to make our life better. And so in the darkest moments, remember that, and remember that as a spiritual person, as a spirit that you are, you're going to be okay. You have been okay for millennia. We're going to outlive this. We're going to be okay. The world's not a bad place. The world is an incredible place for learning if we have the eyes to see. Can we take advantage of this? There will be an incredible amount of learning after this phase, or during this phase, but we're only going to realize it afterwards. So the world may seem like it's getting worse, but it's not. It is getting better. It's only a matter of time. The process, though, it's uncomfortable of learning because we're stepping out of a comfort zone. So may you enjoy all the discomfort that life brings you. May you make use of all the discomfort and the differences that life brings you. And may you always reject the idea that we're different. We may act differently, but at the end of the day, we're all together too. So thank you for your time, for your patience, especially on Saturday. Saturday. And I hope that from the bottom of my heart, you can continue to grow, and I look forward to learning from all your differences. And then next time. We're going to make a little break, but before we do that, do we have any comments or any questions?